Okay, so I'm doing some work on this speaker cabinet. This is a CARVIN 412 cabinet with Celestion speakers. It's rated at 280 watts. The original impedance was 4 ohms, and I'm switching it to 16 ohms. One reason is I think that the CARVIN legacy cabinets are rated at 16 ohms. So what I'm going to do is wire this up in series parallel instead of all parallel like it was before. So I've already been soldering wire onto these speakers, and so I'm going to show you that. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the wiring that this cabinet came with, and I think this cabinet was probably made in the 80s at some time. So here's some of the stock wiring that the cabinet came with, and I've seen all different gauge speaker wire in cabinets. This might actually be 18 gauge, and what I'm putting in the cabinet is 14 gauge, all copper. So these wires, they have these crimp fittings here, and the wiring has what looks like PVC insulation on it, maybe, and it seems like the wiring has some solder running the entire length of the wire. So if I try to, like, and never mind the green tape, electrical tape, that was from the reworking that I did. So if you try to solder this right here, what happens is it heats up the solder on the wire back here, and it makes everything loose. And so it had these kind of spade connectors, and I'm going to show you why those were not making very good connection on the speakers. So here's the Celestion 12-inch speaker. It's a G12M70, 16 ohm impedance. And this is the connections that it comes with. And so the little spade connectors, they don't really go on there and make a very good connection. They just kind of don't go on there quite right, and they get really loose. And so what I'm actually doing here is I'm running this 14 gauge all copper wire, more like let's see if I can show you, more like this type of situation where I take the insulation off, run the copper through there, and then I solder it, and I think that's making a really good connection. So you've got the positive and then you got the ground. So they don't have the double spade like a lot of the newer speakers have. So here's an example of the type of connection that I'm making like this, soldering it on there, and I mean, it's really solid. You know, it's not moving around or anything like that. And it gives me some flexibility. And also the two speakers that don't look quite as good, I'm going to move those to the bottom and move the better looking ones to the top. And you can see the difference in the size of the 14 gauge versus 18 gauge wire. And when I'm making a hot soldering connection on this wire, it's not melting the insulation like what was happening on these other wires. And I don't know if this is specific to CARVIN. You know, I've worked on some Marshall cabinets and Fender cabinets, and I've never really seen this type of wiring, but it does have a fuse on the cabinet, and I'm going to bypass the fuse. All right, so I finished up working on this cabinet. So I got all the wiring done. I bypassed the fuse on the panel. I got the side handle reinstalled. I got the grill put back on, and I used like some toothpick, some wood glue, so that all those screws would bite a little better. So I've got it all at 16 ohms. I think it's series parallel is what it's called. First I tested it out with this Randall RH200 and it worked just fine. And that head is at 4 ohms. And then I tested it out with my Legacy VL100 and switched it over to the 16 ohm setting. I think that's pretty cool on this amp that you can switch the speaker impedance from 4 to 8 to 16, and it sounds really good and clear. The Legacy amp on 2 on the 50 watt setting is still really loud for that setting, so it puts out a lot of sound. So I'm real happy with the how clear these Celestion speakers sound. Got all the wiring done, and everything I did soldering the wires to the speakers worked perfectly. I didn't even really do any like shrink wrap or anything on the speaker ends because there's really no way any of that can come in contact with anything. And I did use some zip ties to kind of keep everything condensed, but one thing, like, this is not a Legacy cabinet, it's a like a 412-C by CARVIN, and it has like the same geometry as the Legacy cabinet. So I did this orange color, you know, to kind of tie it in with the head. So I'm gonna put a logo on this thing, probably a CARVIN logo that mounts on that center thing. So one thing I did too with the speakers is that I kind of rotated them in a way that fits the wiring better. So that's one thing too, is that the way the speakers were installed, the wiring connections were not as accessible. So I've installed them now to where like the wiring connections are more like back to back, so like there to, you know, to there as opposed to up here to, you know. So this cabinet's sounding good and doesn't have any loose connections at all. Even the jack plate did great. So I was glad I had the Randall RH200 to test it out. And even the Randall RH200, it sounds really good through this cabinet. This is like a stealth B52 cabinet, and it puts out a lot of sound, and I like how it's made, you know. But these Celestions in this thing are hard to beat. So I hope that something in this video kind of can help the other people out there that have CARVIN speaker cabinets or older speaker cabinets. Maybe you might see this and maybe want to check your wiring on your cabinets to kind of see if it's all holding up or if all the insulation's doing well. So that insulation on this full copper wiring 14 gauge that I've put in this cabinet works really well. So I just feel a lot better with this new heavy gauge copper wiring in this cabinet, and I just have a lot more faith in it, because those way that those other prongs were connected on there, the geometry of how it all went together just wasn't really, I wasn't really happy with it. So I have no idea about any of the CARVIN speaker cabinets from the the 90s or 2000s onward, but anyway, so here it is. Thanks a lot.